"I need a family and you need a home," said the Hell's Angel to the shivering orphan girl. Rain hammered the rusted roof of an old biker bar on the edge of a forgotten highway. Inside, a man with a scarred face and a leather jacket marked with the emblem of the Hell's Angels sat alone, his heavy hands wrapped around a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His name was Jax. Once feared on the roads, now he was just another broken soul trying to drown ghosts that wouldn't stay dead. He had lost everything, his brothers, his pride, his purpose. The roar of engines had been replaced by silence, and the man who once ruled the asphalt now sat in it like a king without a throne. Outside, a storm raged. And in that storm, a little girl barely 12, soaked to the bone, pressed herself against a dumpster for shelter. Her name was Lily. She had been wandering the streets for 3 days, hungry, cold, and terrified. Her parents had died in a house fire that left nothing but ashes and nightmares. Nobody wanted her, nobody cared. Until that night. When the door of the bar creaked open, and Jack stepped out into the rain, muttering to himself about ghosts, fate decided to make them meet. He noticed her, a tiny, trembling shape behind the trash bin. At first, he thought she was a stray dog. But when she turned her pale face toward him, he saw the fear, the bruises, and the hopelessness that only someone who's been abandoned by the world could carry. "Hey," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "You lost, kid?" She didn't answer. She just looked at him, wary, like he might hurt her. Then she whispered, barely audible, "I don't have anyone." Something in Jax's chest cracked open. He had told himself long ago that he didn't care about anything or anyone. But in that moment, seeing that little girl alone in the rain, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He took off his leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "You need a home," he said quietly, his voice trembling with emotion he didn't want to show. "And I think I need a family." That night, he took her to the small shack he called home. It wasn't much: a bed, a stove, and a wall filled with pictures of his old biker brothers, men long gone or buried. He made her soup, wrapped her in blankets, and sat on the floor, staring into the fire. "You can stay here until we figure things out," he said. Lily nodded and fell asleep, the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. Days turned into weeks. Jax found himself waking up early to make her breakfast, walking her to school, and even fixing up an old bike so she could ride with him around the town. The town folks whispered, "That's Jax, the Hell's Angel, and he's got a kid now." But Jax didn't care. For the first time, he had something good. Something worth fighting for. But peace never lasts long in a life like his. One afternoon, a group of men from his old biker gang rolled into town. The same gang that had turned on him years ago after he refused to join their drug trade. Their leader, Vince, sneered when he saw Lily standing next to Jax. "Didn't know you went soft," he laughed. "Trading bullets for babysitting?" Jax stood his ground. "Walk away, Vince," he warned. But Vince didn't. They came back that night. Jax woke to the sound of shattering glass and roaring engines. They set his shack on fire, trying to smoke him out. Lily screamed as Jax dragged her out through the back door, covering her with his jacket again. Flames roared behind them, eating away the only home he'd rebuilt. He hid her behind a rock and turned back toward the fire. "Stay here," he said. "Don't move." The fight that followed was brutal. 1 against 5, Jax fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose but the girl who gave him reason to live. He was beaten, bloodied, and almost broken, but he didn't stop. By dawn, when the police arrived, the bikers were gone, and Jax was lying in the dirt, barely conscious. Lily ran to him, crying. "Don't go, Jax. Please." He looked up at her through swollen eyes, managed a weak smile, and said, "Family means fighting for someone, even when you can't stand anymore." He was taken to the hospital, where doctors said it was a miracle he survived. The town rallied around Lily. People who had once feared Jax now saw the truth. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who found redemption through love. When he recovered, he bought an old piece of land on the edge of town and built a new home with help from locals, a small wooden house with a motorcycle parked out front and a sign over the porch that read, "Home of Jax and Lily." Years passed. Lily grew up, went to college, and came back to the town that had once forgotten her. Jax had gray in his beard and pain in his bones, but every time he saw her, he smiled like a proud father. One day, she asked him, "Why did you help me that night, Jax?" He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and said, "Because everyone deserves one chance to find family. You were mine." And on quiet evenings, when the sun dipped behind the hills and the engine of his Harley rumbled softly in the distance, Jax would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching Lily laugh in the yard, and he'd whisper to the wind, "I needed a family, and she needed a home. Guess we both found what we were missing." The story of Jax and Lily spread far beyond that little town, a story of pain turned into love, of redemption found in the most unlikely places. It became a reminder that no matter how dark the road gets, sometimes, one act of kindness can rebuild two broken souls, and months passed after the fire, but the memory of that night still haunted both Jax and Lily. Every time thunder rolled, Lily would flinch, her small hands clutching the hem of her jacket, his old leather jacket, the one still smelling faintly of smoke and oil. She wore it everywhere, even when it was too hot, because to her, it wasn't just a jacket. It was safety. It was home. Jax noticed how she'd sometimes wake up screaming, her eyes wide with the memory of flames and chaos. He'd rush to her side, sit beside her on the creaky bed, and whisper, "You're safe now, kid. No one's gonna hurt you again." But inside, he wasn't sure. The scars of his past life still followed him like shadows on the open road. He feared that as long as he breathed, trouble would always find its way to their doorstep. He started working at a small mechanic shop in town, fixing trucks and bikes for the locals. The pay wasn't much, but it was honest work. Every day, he came home covered in grease and exhaustion, but when he saw Lily waiting at the door, smiling and holding out a plate of dinner she'd made, the weariness melted away. For the first time in decades, Jax felt alive again, not as a biker or a fighter, but as something he never thought he'd be, a father. Lily, too, began to change. She was still quiet, still carried that sadness in her eyes, but Jax noticed sparks of confidence returning. She started making friends at school, helping at the town shelter, and even saving her allowance to buy small gifts for Jax. "You fixed my life," she told him once with a shy grin. "Least I can do is fix your coffee every morning." But peace, as always, has a way of testing the strong. One evening, Jax received a letter in the mail, a logo he recognized instantly. The emblem of the old biker gang he once called family. His heart sank. The message was simple, "You don't walk away from the angels." Below it was a picture of Lily walking home from school. He sat in silence for a long time, the paper trembling in his hand. Rage and fear twisted inside him. The gang wasn't done. They had found him again, and this time, they were coming for what mattered most. That night, while Lily was asleep, Jack sat on the porch with his pistol on the table and his old leather gloves beside it. He had promised himself he'd never go back to that world. But promises meant nothing when family was at risk. The next morning, he sent Lily to stay with a woman named Martha, a kind widow from town who had once lost her son in a car accident. "You're gonna stay with Miss Martha for a bit," Jax told her. "Just till I sort something out." She frowned, sensing something was wrong. "You're lying," she whispered. "You're going to fight again, aren't you?" Jax smiled faintly. "Sometimes you gotta face your past to protect your future." That night, the roar of engines echoed once more through the hills. Jax met them at the old quarry, the same place where he'd earned his patch years ago. The air was thick with tension and gasoline. Vince stepped out first, his smirk cold as steel. "You think you can play house and forget who you are?" Jax's reply was calm but deadly. "I remember exactly who I am. That's why I left." The confrontation exploded into chaos. Chains swung, fists flew, engines roared, and the night lit up with violence. Jax fought like a man possessed, not for pride, not for revenge, but for the little girl who called him family. He took blows that would have dropped a lesser man, but he didn't stop. When the dust finally settled, the gang lay scattered, beaten, and broken. Vince, bruised and bloodied, stared up at Jax and muttered, "You're no angel anymore." Jax looked down at him and said, "You're right. I'm something better, a father." The police arrived minutes later, sirens slicing through the night. This time, Jax didn't run. He didn't hide. He told them everything, the threats, the arson, the violence. It took courage, but it ended the cycle once and for all. Vince and his crew were arrested, and Jax finally laid his past to rest. Weeks later, Lily came running into his arms outside the police station. She cried so hard he could barely breathe. "I thought you were gone," she sobbed. He held her tight, whispering into her hair, "Not a chance, kid. I told you, family doesn't leave." Life slowly returned to peace again. The town, once suspicious of Jax, now saw him as a hero. He started a program for at-risk teens, teaching them to fix bikes, to stay off the streets, to find purpose. He called it Road to Redemption. Lily painted the sign herself in bright red letters. Years later, when Lily graduated high school, she stood on the stage in front of the whole town. Jax watched from the crowd, his heart swelling with pride. When she gave her speech, her voice trembled with emotion. "People say home is a place," she said. "But I learned that home can be a person. Mine was a man who saw a broken girl and said, 'You need a home, and I need a family.' He saved me. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure his kindness saves others too." Jax wiped away a tear he didn't want anyone to see. The applause thundered, but all he heard was her voice, full of love, full of hope. That night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the air filled with the hum of crickets, Jax sat on his porch, staring at the stars. Lily came out, sat beside him, and leaned her head on his shoulder. "You still miss the road?" she asked. He smiled softly. "Sometimes," he said. "But then I look at you, and I realize I already made it home." In that moment, the man who once rode with outlaws realized he had found something far greater than freedom, he had found peace. And for the first time in his life, the road behind him was longer than the one ahead, and that was just fine. Because the one thing he'd always been searching for, family, love, redemption, had been with him all along to make them whole again. Years rolled by, and the small wooden house on the edge of town became a symbol of second chances. Jax and Lily's story had spread quietly at first, through whispers, then through word of mouth, until people began visiting just to see the man who turned his pain into purpose. The sign that once read "Home of Jax and Lily" was now weathered and faded, but it still stood tall, just like the man who built it. Lily had grown into a strong young woman, with eyes full of kindness and a voice that carried calm strength. She had gone on to study social work and now ran a youth center in town, a place for lost kids, runaways, and orphans. The sign above the door read "The Haven," and on the wall inside hung a single framed photo, a younger Jax kneeling beside his motorcycle, with little Lily sitting on the seat, both smiling like the world had finally forgiven them. But Jax was getting older. The years of fights, crashes, and pain were taking their toll. His hands shook sometimes when he worked on bikes, and he'd often cough, hiding the sound so Lily wouldn't worry. Yet, he never let the fire inside him fade. Every morning, he'd start his Harley just to hear the engine rumble. It was his heartbeat, a reminder of the life he'd lived and the one he'd rebuilt. One autumn afternoon, Jax was sitting outside the shop when a boy about 16 came walking up the dirt road. He was thin, dirty, and had a wild, frightened look in his eyes. His name was Tyler. Lily had told Jax about him, a runaway, living in abandoned cars, stealing food to survive. When the boy stopped at the gate, Jax looked up from his coffee and said, "You hungry?" Tyler hesitated, then nodded. Jax smiled. "Good. Because I don't eat leftovers." That night, Tyler sat at their kitchen table, eating like he hadn't eaten in weeks. Lily watched with tears in her eyes. She remembered that same hunger, that same fear, in herself years ago. After dinner, Jax handed the boy a clean shirt and an old sleeping bag. "You can crash in the shed," he said. "It's not much, but it's dry." Over time, Tyler began to open up. He told Jax and Lily about the foster homes that had failed him, the anger that never went away, and the people who gave up on him too soon. Jax listened quietly, then said, "People are gonna fail you, kid. But that doesn't mean you gotta fail yourself." Those words stuck with Tyler, just as Jax's had once stuck with Lily. But just as things started to feel right, Jax's body began to give in. One morning, Lily found him on the porch, pale and gasping. The doctor said his heart was failing, the years of fighting, drinking, and living hard had finally caught up. Jax brushed it off with a laugh. "Guess the old engine's finally out of gas," he joked. But Lily could see the truth behind his eyes. He was tired. Tyler, who had never cried in front of anyone, broke down the night he found out. "You can't go," he said through tears. "You're the only person who ever gave a damn about me." Jax put a hand on his shoulder, his voice low but firm. "Listen to me, kid. Don't waste time feeling sorry for people like me. I had my shot. What matters is what you do with yours. Take care of her, and take care of yourself. Promise me." Tyler nodded, tears streaming down his face. As the days grew colder, Jax spent more time sitting outside, staring at the sunset over the hills. Lily would bring him tea, and they'd sit together in silence, no words, just memories hanging in the air between them. One evening, she finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Do you ever regret anything, Jax?" He looked at her, his eyes soft and full of peace. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I regret not finding you sooner." That night, as the world outside grew quiet, Jax passed away in his sleep. No pain, no struggle, just a peaceful exhale, as if the road he'd been traveling all his life had finally brought him home. When Lily found him in the morning, he was sitting in his chair, a faint smile on his lips, and his old leather jacket folded neatly beside him. The town mourned. Hundreds came to the funeral, bikers, locals, teachers, even cops. Everyone had a story about how Jax had changed something in their lives. Tyler spoke last. Standing beside Lily, he said through trembling lips, "He wasn't just a biker. He was a man who taught us all what family means. He didn't save people with words, he did it with heart." After the funeral, Lily and Tyler continued what Jax started. They expanded the haven, opening shelters in nearby towns. On the wall of every new center, they painted Jax's words in bold letters, "You need a home, and I need a family." It became more than a quote, it became a legacy. Years later, Lily stood by the same porch where Jax once sat. The house was older now, but it still smelled of oil, rain, and coffee, just like he left it. Tyler walked up beside her, holding a small box. Inside was Jax's worn-out leather jacket. Lily smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "He'd want you to have it," she said softly. Tyler shook his head. "No. He'd want it right here." He hung the jacket on the porch railing, where it caught the wind and fluttered gently, as if the man himself was still watching over them. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and crimson. The rumble of distant bikes echoed faintly across the valley, and Lily smiled. "You hear that?" she whispered. "That's him, still riding, still free." And in that moment, surrounded by the peace he had built from chaos, Lily realized that family isn't always about blood or names. It's about those who choose to stand by you when no one else will, those who find you in the storm and never let go. Jax had once said, "Some roads lead you to trouble. Others lead you home." And though his road had ended, his spirit still rode on. In years later, Lily stood on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the hills, the same spot where Jax once sat every evening. His old leather jacket still hung on the railing, moving gently in the wind. Tyler stood beside her, quiet and thoughtful. Lily smiled faintly and whispered, "He finally found his peace." Tyler nodded. "Yeah, and he gave it to us too." They stood in silence for a while, the soft rumble of distant motorcycles echoing faintly through the valley, a sound that felt like Jax saying goodbye. Lily looked up at the sky and said, "You needed a family, and I needed a home. You gave me both." And with that, the house grew quiet again, filled not with loss, but with love, a reminder that even broken souls can find their way home when they find each other. Every heart he had touched, in every child he had saved, and in every soul who finally found a place to belong.